Okay, we are talking about how those key words need to be put into action. Thinking about the theological importance of the word, and we specifically just kind of zeroing in on Peter and what Peter's doing with the word conduct. But the same is true with what's John doing with the word world? What's Paul doing with the word righteous or righteousness? And when we see that Bible writers would frequently take what might otherwise be understood as a common word, but then make that word or transform that word into theological significance, now that's something that is really cool, but it's important to know. What is John doing with the word light? What's he doing with the word darkness in 1 John? Well, those are common words. It's not that I don't have a problem understanding what the word light means, but in a theological sense, what does light mean? What does darkness mean? So that's where we're putting those words into action, and we're trying to determine, all right, so what's the big deal about light in 1 John, or darkness, or righteousness in Romans, and so on. All right, then, moving on, step number 5 is to broaden our scope here and look at paragraphs. All right, we've got questions that we need to ask when we're trying to back up and take a look at the forest here. What is the main thought of a paragraph? Typically, as Kaiser reminded us, and I had this quote on an earlier slide, is that there's typically one main thought. Very rarely is there going to be a paragraph in which there are like two main thoughts. Even in our discussion about conduct and holiness, there's really only one thought. We got two key words, but really only one main thought that's found within that paragraph. So we're asking the question, what is the main thought? How does the paragraph advance the author's argument or point? The old, what is this doing here? How does it contribute to what it is that we're talking about? Yes?
Do we still need to go back and pick apart the text and look for where we would put the paragraphs as opposed to what the Bible does, like what we did in the Old Testament?
Yeah, still going to need to do that. And what frequently happens in the New Testament is the thought actually spills over to the next chapter. And we fail to see that unless we're kind of thinking along those lines. It seems like that doesn't happen quite as much in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament, and I'm not sure why, but there are a lot of thoughts that go into the first verse or 2 or 3 verses into the next chapter.
Denny?
Yeah.
Do you find that it's easier or harder, or about the same, to figure out the pericopes in the New Testament versus the Old Testament text?
I think it's about the same. Both languages have, kind of transition words that are used, and so those are just easily spotted. All right, how does the paragraph prepare us for the next paragraph? then, how would I analyze the paragraph that I'm talking about here? Would it be something that I would consider to be a key paragraph, a transitional paragraph? Now, this particular step is something that when we get to step 7, we're going to kind of look at this in a little bit more detail. Right now, we're just trying to make sure that we've done a pretty decent job of dividing up the text. We're not starting it too soon, and we're not ending it too quickly. We're capturing the pericope, the whole thought from beginning to end. And just like we saw in the Old Testament, that sometimes it's an entire chapter that we're looking at. It really shouldn't be or isn't subdivided at all. Well, sometimes it's going to be that big a block of material. Other times it can be something that can be as short as one verse. So you just have to kind of look at that and see.
Is there a translation or a resource where you can see how it was originally broken up? Or
not how it was originally broken up.
Okay.
Because
there wasn't any break at all?
There wasn't any break at all.
Okay. So if we just took all of our breaks out, that would be the original, typically, or sort of.
Yeah. And so how does the people know then that something was beginning and something was ending? Only by these transition words.
Okay.
That's the only way that they knew. But they did know that. I mean, it wasn't a guessing game for them. It sometimes is more of one for us. But they understood the close of a thought and the beginning of a new one. So, yeah.
So on this last bullet point, the two main things that you're breaking up are, you have the key paragraph with all the key words, mainly it's rich, it's got a lot to do with the text as a whole. The illustration is those longer sections that don't contain as much of that to demonstrate what they're trying to make the point of in the key illustration, or in the key paragraph. Then the transitions are more so the words that you're talking about that prepare you for the next one, or there wouldn't be like a little small paragraph that gets you into the illustration, or how?
No, there'll be times where you'll have almost a setup to an illustration. You briefly have like a problem or a doctrine, and then that's going to be illustrated, and then you come back and right after the illustration, you get flooded with key words, because now he's going to, all right, what are we going to do with this? How are we going to apply this information? And that's always going to have a lot of key words in it. So that'll happen frequently, especially in Paul. All right, step number 6 is determine if there are any interesting and or unusual syntactical points. Just like we camped a long time on the 4 P's, we're going to camp a long time on this one, because probably if there's any step you don't want to miss, it's this one. Because this really is almost the heart of doing quality exegesis. We're finding what is already there in the text, looking for interesting and or unusual syntactical points. So a syntax means what? Basically, it means the structure of a sentence, how a sentence is put together, a paragraph is put together, in the way sentences interact with each other. Now, you would want to diagram the pericope. And want to use Ephesians 1, 3 through 14 as a case in point.
Where'd you say you're at, Denny?
Ephesians 1, 3 through 14. Now, just scan through your text and see how many sentences you have in this pericope. Ephesians 1, 3 through 14. What'd you come up with? 1, 4, 5. Anybody get more than 5?
31.
Where was the period?
Where's the period?
Yeah.
After verse 14.
Oh, okay.
I have 6.
6. All right, here is something that's interesting. First of all, kind of getting back to the question that was asked a minute ago, the Greek did not have periods. And so periods are those that are supplied by men. But there are things in Greek that would indicate the ending of a sentence and the beginning of a new one. There are none in 3 through 14. In Greek, this is one huge sentence. Now, those of you that have the newer editions of the Greek, I think it's the UBS 4, they put periods in there. But that was more of an editor's decision rather than something in the Greek that demanded it. Now, here's why. We do not like long sentences. We are so accustomed to giving our thoughts in short, bullet point type expressions. But the ancient minds and even modern societies like German will run on for a long time. And you just have grown up in that sort of environment in which you're able to stay with what's being talked about. And what can be mind-numbing in Greek is you've got this massive sentence and you don't get the subject until the end. It's like, in English, we just don't work that way. You've got to lay it out for me in more short, concise sentences and give me the subject almost right at the beginning. All right, so if you've got one massive sentence, what are the principal parts of any sentence?
Verb, noun.
Subject, verb, direct object. All right, so now I've got verses 3 through 14, and I need to boil it down to subject, verb, and direct object. And what you'll find is God, verse 3, chose us, verse 4. He's saying, now, Jenny, are you saying that that whole section is just talking about God chose us? Yeah. Yeah, that's what it's all about. That God chose us. And then when you look at that, you see that it's got some sub-breakdowns to that. For example, you're going to have some aorist participles that are in there. You've got one in verse 5. He chose us, and his choosing manifested itself by predestining us, verses 5 through 7, or 5 through 8. And then his choosing us manifested itself by his making known to us the mystery, verses 9 through 14. Okay? So he chose us. All right? Oh, I wanted to teach and I wanted to preach this section exegetically. Well, God's choosing has manifested itself in two ways, according to this text in Ephesians chapter 1. By his predestining us, and by his making known to us the mystery of his will. Those are the two primary points that Paul is trying to make that illustrates God's choosing. What does God's choosing mean? Now, this is where it becomes, I think, even cooler. How does your verse 15 begin?
For this reason.
Therefore, or for this reason. All right, therefore what? Well, what was the point of 3 through 14? Verses 3 through 14. God chose us. Therefore, since God chose us, and then here we go. Our New American Standard translates it, for this reason. For what reason? Well, most commentaries are going to go back to verse 14, because he's given us a pledge. No, that ain't it. For what reason? That he's chosen us. All right, go to chapter 3, verse 1. What do you got there, Reggie?
For this reason.
For this reason. For what reason? Ditto. Because he chose us. Chapter 3, verse 14. What do you got there?
For this reason.
For this reason. For what reason? Because God chose us. You see what's going on here? We establish what's going on in chapter 1, verses 3 through 14, and Paul's just working that. Because of that reason this, and because of that reason that, and well, here we're all the way into chapter 3, and we're still talking about that. Hey, well, what are we doing? We're determining if there's anything going on as far as syntax and structure and all of those things. And in this particular book, the answer most decidedly is yeah. Yeah, there is something going on with what he's doing. Okay. Let's look at another example, and this is a smaller sample, but we're just wanting to look at the syntax of, in this case, these two verses. Ephesians 1, 18 and 19. All right, New American Standard reads this way. I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened, so that you will know what is the hope of his calling, or the riches of the glory of his inheritance in the saints, What is the surpassing greatness of his power toward us who believe? These are in accordance with the working of the strength of his might. All right, now we've talked about this before when we were trying to identify what?
Purpose statement.
Purpose, and a prayer, the significance of prayers. And so we identified key words that are found in this: know, hope, glory, inheritance, saints, believe, power. So this particular prayer is riddled with key words. But now we're doing something else with this, these verses. We're wanting to analyze it from a syntactical point of view. Now, what do you see here, if anything?
What is?
Yeah. Do you notice that? Look at the repetition of the word what, so that you will know what is the hope of his calling, what are the riches of the glory of his inheritance in the saints, what is the surpassing greatness of his power. Now, as I mentioned before, as we were studying Old Testament exegesis, biblical writers, Old Testament and New, did not number things like we do. First, second, third. But they gave us lists, and lots of them. And the key, when we're talking about syntax, is to find those points. And so, when I'm looking at this, I got 3 points here. When I pray that the eyes of your heart will be enlightened, and you're going to know what? What is, what are, what is. So, when Paul's praying, there are 3 specific areas that he wants them to wise up and know and understand. You guys have got to get this. And I'm praying that you're going to get this. First of all, I pray, I want you to understand the hope of his calling. Do you realize what it is that you have in store for you now? That you answered God's call, the hope that you have now? As being, he chose us. Well, I'm praying that you understand what that means. The hope that you have. All right, what would you guess is the point that he's trying to make with number 2? What are the riches of the glory of his inheritance in the saints? I want you to know what?
Greatness, reward.
You know, I was attending a lectureship several years ago, and this guy preached on this text, and his sermon was how beautiful heaven must be. Ephesians 1:18. And so, you know, his sermon was, you know, talking about how wonderful it's going to be and how so happy we're going to be when we're there. And anyway, I was manning the Bear Valley booth, and he came by and he said, "Well, what'd you think of my talk?" And since he asked, I felt obligated.
Oh, no.
And I said, "You totally missed it." What?
Note to self.
And I said, "Yeah." I said, "You totally missed it." And he goes, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Turn in your Bible to that verse. Ephesians 1:18, your primary text." And I said, "Whose inheritance are we talking about?" God's inheritance. He's not talking about your inheritance, how beautiful heaven must be. He's talking about God's inheritance in the saints. Now that is a totally different point. Paul says, when I pray that you guys would get how important you are to God. You are His inheritance. You're what He gets. You see what that verse is saying? It's not talking about heaven at all. It has nothing to do with our heavenly inheritance. But what a cool thought.
Yeah.
You are His inheritance. That's how important you are. Man.
So what'd the guy say?
Thank you for asking.
No, he said, I totally missed that. And I said, yeah, you did. He said, I totally missed it. And you've got a lot of texts that say what you were trying to say in your sermon, but this wasn't one of them. But here is kind of my point. When we've analyzed this exegetically, then we look at the parts more specifically. And when you're looking at the parts, you're less likely to blow through something and come up with a flawed interpretation of this. We're isolating what are the riches of the glory of His inheritance in the saints. We are His gold. We are His riches. We are His glory.
That's cool.
Man, that is cool. That is an awesome thought. Well, and that'll preach too. We need to be encouraged by being reminded of how special we are to God. You've got a world of people that have denied Him. You've got a world of people that have rejected His word, that have rejected His Son, that have spurned the church that He designed. But those of us that haven't, God says, you're my reward. You're my inheritance. So, if that don't make you feel special, then you ain't going to feel special. But that should make you feel very special. And then Paul said, I'm praying that you guys would get this. Apparently, the church at Ephesus just wasn't getting it. And Paul was having to pray that they would. You just need to understand. He chose us. We are His inheritance. And then the surpassing greatness of His power toward us. When I pray, there's a third aspect of that prayer. And that is, you need to know God's power at work in you. God's not just sitting by and letting us flounder and try to stay above water. His power is out there working for us. Now, I think today's church needs a good shot in the arm. You know, we're so quick to say, well, the age of miracles has ceased. And typically what that means is that God's power is no longer at work. Where'd you get that? Well, that's sort of the way that we see it. But that's not accurate at all. We need to understand that our great God is still very active, still very much at work. And so, you know, we have those same three needs that the first century church did. Anyway, the point is, we're looking at this from a syntactical point perspective. There's a list here. 3 points that we don't have to kind of do some guesswork on what might have been the subject of Paul's prayer. He says, 1, 2, 3. What is, what are, what is. That's what I'm praying. Then you've got a logical conclusion right there in the text. Okay? Let's look at another example. Matthew 28, 18 through 20. Now, because everybody in here has had Matthew, I can't ask this question and get away with it because you guys would end up giving me the right answer.
Oh, I don't know.
Maybe that. But I typically ask people, and we walk through this in Matthew, how many commands do you see here? And they'll say, go, make disciples, baptize, teach, looks like four commands. Well, in actuality, though, there's only one command. Remember that?
Yeah.
And the command is what?
Go make disciples.
Make disciples. That's the only command in the pericope here. Well, what happens in the Greek that is very cool is that you will have a particular syntactical structure where you will have something like this, a command, and then it'll be followed by participles. And in this case, you've got baptizing and teaching. So there's only one command, make disciples. And then the participles, baptizing and teaching, function in a way that explain how you obey the command. That's how you make a disciple. You baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and you teach them to observe all things that I commanded you. You take out either one of those participles, then you haven't made a disciple. So it amazes me, well, actually it doesn't, but if you look at this verse from a syntactical, exegetical point, there is no way you're going to say baptism isn't important. There's no way. Because you're not a disciple unless you're baptized. That's the clear teaching of this verse. And you're not a disciple unless you're learning what it is that Jesus has commanded and being taught to not just learn, but do what he commanded.
Okay, you are implying that the way we typically use this verse to say, teach, baptize, and teach them again, is not what that verse is saying. You following what I'm?
Yeah.
Will you elaborate on
Yeah. There's an assumption that some preliminary teaching was done that led to baptism, but Jesus is not so concerned about that.
Right.
It's almost like it's a package deal that led to baptism, which is really that first step. But you know, we typically teach and get them to the baptistry, and then we're done.
You don't do the rest.
Yeah, and so if we truly understand the import of this verse, we've only done one of the two of the expectation. All right, so you are seeing what's going on? You got a command. The command's followed by participles. And this is a very typical Greek structure. Very typical. Now, the thing is, as we're doing exegetical work, is we have to train ourselves to look for these things. Now, one of the awesome tools that Logos has are these things that are called visual filters.
Mhm.
And you can tell logos in your English text or your Greek text or both, mark all the imperatives. And then mark all the participles. And so now you're just staring at a text, but all of a sudden it's created these colors for you where, like I want my participles to be in a block and then be in red. Those are imperatives. So I want them to jump out. And then the participles I have as, I don't know, green or something like, whatever you choose. You can tell it however you want. But now I'm seeing, oh, I got this in red, and then I've got these words underneath it that are in green. Well, there you go. You got a command followed by participles. And it's right there. So you've got a list that was automatically there, but you ask most people, what are the commands? Well, there are 4. Well, no, there aren't 4. There's just 1. And so now all of a sudden you get a different perspective on what the Great Commission is really saying. All right, let's look at another example, Ephesians 5, 18 through 20. In this text, you have the command, be filled with the Spirit. That command is followed by a series of participles. Speaking, singing, making melody, and giving thanks. Now, think about it this way. If you were told, commanded, be filled with the Spirit,
Right.
would you know how to do that? Would you know what that meant? No. Neither would the first century Christians. Just like Jesus said, go make disciples. They wouldn't have known what they were supposed to do to make a disciple. They would have had their own thoughts and ideas, and they would have gone out and tried to do that best they knew how. But the participles explain the command. So one would not know automatically how to obey the command to be filled with the Spirit. The participles explain how to execute the command. Now, Michael took this class and decided when he was invited to speak on a Sunday morning that he was going to exegetically preach this text. And so he made a PowerPoint that went along with the sermon, and so I scored his PowerPoint. And you'll instantly recognize that this is not a Denny PowerPoint. This is a Michael Height PowerPoint. Because I have no idea how to do all that cool stuff. But So, singing from the heart, Ephesians 5:18-20, Colossians 3:16. So he put the text up there. Do not get drunk with wine, for that's dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit. Speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody with your heart to the Lord, always giving thanks for all things in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ to God, even the Father. All right, so the command here is to be filled with the Spirit. Now, this is probably not a reference to the Holy Spirit, but to be spiritual. Be a spiritually filled person. All right, so what does a spiritually filled person do? Well, you might have an idea as to what that might mean, what a spiritually filled person is going to do. But Paul, through these participles, remember, a participle is typically translated into an ing word in English. All right? So, speaking, singing, making melody, giving thanks. See the ing words? So, there are 4 participles that explain what a spirit-filled person does. He is speaking to one another. A spiritually filled person is not going to sit there like a grumpy old man. That's not what a spiritual person would do when, for example, we come together in our assembly and we're singing. And those of you that have led songs know what I'm talking about, right, Mark? You look out and you see just exactly this. I mean, they're just sitting there and they got a kind of a pruned look on their face, and well, Paul says that's wrong. That's not what a spiritual person would do. You need to be speaking to one another. That's what God designed the song service to be. That we're communicating to one another with these songs. As a matter of fact, he breaks it down. Songs are songs based upon the Old Testament book of Songs. Hymns are those that have to do with the great attributes of deity, like, talking about the greatness of God or the creation of God. All hail the power of Jesus' name. Those are hymns. Spiritual songs are those in which we're admonishing one another to onward Christian soldiers. Take time to be holy type songs. But we're admonishing one another in those 3 categories of songs. Now, kind of a side point, but a Denny pet peeve, and when I get an opportunity to slide in a Petrillo pet peeve, Petrillo P problem.
Wow.
I've got
Sounds major.
I've got to do it. Our auditoriums are almost killers to doing this, because when I'm talking to you or you're talking to me, I would prefer not looking at the back of your head. And you've seen the back of mine, and you don't particularly want to sit there and stare at that either. But we've designed our auditoriums where we're speaking to one another that way. And it's also given, and I know that this bugs Neil and it bugs me too, that we set up our auditorium where we're the audience. And the preacher is the entertainer. That's God's the audience, and we're all participants equally. We're singing to one another. And so in smaller churches that I preached for, we arranged the auditorium to where we're all in a circle. And you're seeing faces. And I'll tell you what, talk about putting you in an uncomfort zone. We're not used to doing that. We're so accustomed to singing to the back of somebody's head that I kind of get comfortable with that.
You should tell one of the elders.
No, they don't.
No, you shouldn't.
No, I was just kidding.
But anyway, what we have to do is we have to work extra hard to know that we're singing to each other with these psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Yes.
In the text, so would you break up verse 21 as a separate line then?
Yeah, not there yet.
Okay.
Hang on.
Simmer down.
But the answer is yes. And the real quick short answer, since you asked, is it is an aorist participle, not a present participle, and so I don't think it's a part of the list.
I knew it was an aorist participle.
Now, Dan thinks it should be number 5, and because it's a participle, and he doesn't have a problem with the fact that it changes from a present to an aorist, but to me it's almost like it belongs as a separate point, not part of this listing. Yeah.
What's aorist?
Aorist is point action past tense, an event in the past, and depending, like if it's an aorist participle, it has continuing effect on the present, but there's a particular point in the past when whatever you're talking about happened.
I just realized that you weren't talking about Dan Mayfield. Who is Dan? I haven't had him yet, but sorry.
All right, then the second participle is singing. The word singing is just the word ado, A-D-O, we transliterated the word. And as we would be doing our word study, the word ado means with the mouth. With the mouth. It is as close to the word a cappella as you're going to find in the Greek language. So we're using the mouth. Now, we're speaking to one another, but we're using the mouth. And the greater context means we're using the mouth in song, but still the point is we are singing, ado, we're singing, we're using the mouth to make a song. And then third participle is making melody. It's 2 words, but it's just one word in Greek, solemn test. Making melody with your heart to the Lord. Well, when you study this word in TD&T and in BDAG, you'll find that the word used to mean to pluck the strings of an instrument. But by the time we get to the New Testament, that no longer was the meaning of the word solo. that solo, according to Gerhard Delling in TDNT, is one that the idea of play is no longer a part of the meaning of this word. Now, we understand that words change in their meaning, just like we talked about the word gay in English. It changed over time. Well, the word solo, back in classical Greek during the days of Alexander, meant the sing and play. But over the course of the centuries, the idea of play dropped out of the meaning of this word, where it had a more specific definition, and that meant to sing. But we would also note, though, that the phrase with the heart is what's referred to in Greek as the instrumental case. The word with is a phrase that is just called the instrumental case. So the instrument that's being used is actually given in this text. The heart. You're making melody, but you're making it not with some external instrument, but with an internal one, the heart. So with the mouth, you're making music that originates from the heart. Now, these are all specific words. The fourth participle is giving thanks. Notice the ing there as well. It's all one word in Greek, but it's translated into two words in the English. So a person that is not thankful is not spiritual. Be filled with the Spirit. That's what's commanded. You speak to one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. That's what a spiritual person does. You sing. You make melody with your heart. That means it's genuine. It's not just words. You know, Jesus said in John 4, verse 24, that God is seeking those that will worship Him in spirit and in truth. Well, spiritual worship is with the heart. Giving thanks for all things. Spiritual person sees the rainbow in the clouds, sees the good amidst the bad. Well, that's a pretty cool text. And there's a list there. The command, be filled with the Spirit, but you've got 4 points here on what that means, how you do that. And those are the participles. So you've got the imperative, followed by the participles. And you could even break this down like this. Like back in the old days when you would diagram sentences, you've got the command, be filled with the Spirit. Then you've got 4 participles, speaking, singing, making melody, giving thanks. And then under speaking, you've got quite a bit of additional information to one another in psalms, in hymns, and spiritual songs. Then Paul says nothing more than singing, and then making melody with the heart to the Lord. So he's got 2 prepositional phrases that explain making melody. And then 4th, giving thanks, which he follows for all things in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ to God, even the Father. So it breaks down very beautifully when you analyze it exegetically. right, and then in his sermon, Mike went on and talked about Colossians 3:16. What's the command here? Wayne?
To have the word dwell in.
Yeah. Let the word of Christ dwell. That's the command. All right, so how do, according to this text, you implement that command?
With all wisdom, teaching, admonishing one another, with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs.
Don't quit.
Singing with thankfulness in your hearts to God.
Okay, so if we're looking for participles, which in this case we are, what are the three participles? Remember, ing words.
Teaching, admonishing, singing.
That's it. So, let the word dwell, that's the command. Well, how do I do that? I teach, I admonish, and I sing. So, in the Colossian passage, a different point is being made. If I'm not interested in teaching and admonishing, then Paul would say, what's my problem?
Christ's word's not dwelling in you.
What's that?
Christ's word's not dwelling in you.
Yeah, you don't have the word of Christ in you. Because if you did, you'd be teaching. You'd be admonishing. You'd be singing. That's what a person that's got the word of Christ dwelling in them does. But a person that doesn't sing, a person that doesn't admonish, well, there's a fundamental spiritual problem with that person, and it all boils down to they just don't have the word of Christ in them. Because if they did, this is what they'd be doing. So it's really it still involves singing, but it's a different point than the Ephesians 5 text, where he's talking about being filled with the Spirit. Now we're talking about what the Word of Christ does when it dwells within. Okay. Bell's going to cut us off here before I get very far into the next point. So let's just stop there, and we've got more to say about syntax and all that in the Greek text, so we'll get to that on Thursday.
Can you show the chart again, please?
Yeah.
The Ephesians 5, yeah.
This one? Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, yes.
Okay.